What do you do when your own family sees your success as a threat? I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. But it wasn't until that night that I finally got my answer. My name is Rebecca Becca Hawthorne, and I'm 32 years old. I built my career from the ground up. Went from a broke kid in Austin, Texas, to becoming a real estate CEO in Manhattan. I worked tirelessly, sacrificed everything, with one goal in mind: to give my family the life they never had. Turns out, they never wanted it in the first place. For my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, I wanted to give them something truly special: a luxury vacation at Palm Beach, Florida. A week of five-star treatment, breathtaking ocean views, and every comfort they could dream of. They deserved it, or at least, I thought they did. The night before they were supposed to leave, I found out the truth. They had sold the vacation package, cashed it in, not because they needed the money, but because they didn't want to feel like they owed me anything. And the worst part? They laughed about it. That was the moment it hit me. No matter what I do, I will never be enough for them. I shared my story honor/true off my chest, not because I want sympathy, but because I need to get this off my chest. Because this isn't just about a vacation, but it's about betrayal. It's about realizing that sometimes family isn't who you're born to, but who actually values you. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you love real-life stories like this, don't forget to follow Reddit True Vault for more. I grew up knowing that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be enough for my parents. My name is Rebecca Becca Hawthorne, and I was born into a family where ambition wasn't encouraged, especially not for a girl. In our household, success was a man's job, and a daughter's worth was measured by how well she followed the rules, not by what she could achieve. My father, Douglas Hawthorne, was the kind of man who believed that a woman's place was beside a man, not ahead of him. He ran a small auto repair shop in Austin, Texas, and he was proud of the fact that he never took handouts from anyone. He valued independence, but only for himself. If I ever mentioned my dreams or my goals, he would scoff and say, "A man should be the one providing, not a woman." My mother, Catherine Hawthorne, was no different. She had spent her entire life as a housewife, convinced that her sacrifices were what kept the family together. But deep down, I think she resented every moment of it. She saw my success as a threat, as if my ability to stand on my own 2 feet somehow undermined her choices. And then there was Delilah, my younger sister. Delilah was everything I wasn't: soft-spoken, agreeable, and completely dependent on my parents. She never had to work hard for anything, because she never had to. If she failed a test, it was just a bad day. If she didn't want to go to college, it was her choice. And when she quit job after job, my parents just shrugged and said, "She's still figuring things out." I never had that luxury. When I was 6 years old, I won my first spelling bee. I remember coming home, my tiny hands clutching a cheap plastic trophy, so proud I could barely contain myself. Delilah had drawn a picture that day, just a stick figure with our family's names scribbled underneath it. My parents pinned her drawing to the fridge and didn't even look twice at my trophy. When I was 9, I started my own little lemonade stand in the summer. I made enough money to buy myself a new pair of shoes for school. My dad saw me counting the money one evening and said, "A girl shouldn't worry about making money. That's what a father is for." I remember staring at him, confused, because in my mind, wasn't it a good thing to be independent? By the time I was 16, I had stopped trying to make them proud. I got a job at a local diner, started saving up for college, and did everything I could to build a future for myself, one that didn't rely on their approval. They noticed, but not in the way I wanted. Instead of pride, they were offended. My father would mutter under his breath about how I was too focused on money. My mother would sigh and tell me that I was acting like we were some kind of charity case. And Delilah? She just sat there, watching, waiting, knowing that no matter what I did, I would always be the odd one out. When I got my full-ride scholarship to NYU, I thought, for the first time, that maybe, just maybe, they would be proud of me. That maybe this would be the moment they saw me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. But when I told them, my father just leaned back in his chair and said, "We never asked you to do all that." And my mother? She just sighed and said, "We didn't raise you to be so far away." Not a single word of congratulations, not a single ounce of pride. Delilah failed out of community college a year later. My parents bought her a car to cheer her up. That was the moment I finally understood. It wasn't that I wasn't enough for them. It was that I would never be what they wanted me to be. And no matter how much success I had, they would rather resent me than admit that I had done something right. Have you ever felt like your own family was rooting against you? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more real-life stories like this, don't forget to follow Reddit True Vault. I never stopped trying. Even after everything, I still wanted to believe that I could make them happy. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was desperate. But at the time, I thought this was my chance to finally fix things. By the time I turned 32, I had everything I had once dreamed of. I was living in Manhattan, running my own real estate development firm, and I had built a life that no longer depended on my parents' approval. And yet, deep down, a part of me still wanted to believe that I could earn their love. That if I just gave them enough, helped them enough, proved myself enough, they would finally see me the way I had always wanted them to. So, I started planning. I wasn't just throwing money at them. I was creating a future where they wouldn't have to struggle anymore. First, the vacation. I booked them a 1-week stay at Palm Beach, Florida, in one of the most exclusive resorts. It wasn't just a regular vacation, it was an experience. Luxury suites, private beaches, spa treatments, world-class dining. For once in their lives, they wouldn't have to worry about a single thing. No bills, no cooking, no stress, just pure relaxation. Second, the house. My parents had lived in the same aging, rundown home in Austin for years. They refused to let me pay for renovations, refused to accept any money from me. But I thought if I framed it differently, they'd see it for what it was, a gift, not charity. So, instead of fixing up their old place, I planned to buy them a new one. Something comfortable but modest, in a quiet neighborhood where they could finally retire without financial worries. No mortgage, no stress, just security. Third, Delilah's future. I knew she had no intention of changing. She had bounced from job to job, never committing to anything, and my parents had always shielded her from the consequences. But I still wanted to give her an opportunity. So, I set up a trust fund for her education. It wasn't just a handout, it was a chance. If she ever decided to go back to school, start a business, or actually try for something, the money would be there. I spent months working out every detail. I spoke with lawyers, financial advisors, and estate planners to make sure everything was legally sound. I coordinated with the resort to make their stay as special as possible. I even hired a real estate agent in Austin to start scouting for the perfect home. This wasn't just about money. This was about proving to them that I still loved them, that I still wanted to be part of their lives, that despite everything, I still believed in us as a family. I told myself that this would be the turning point, that when they saw everything I had done for them, when they saw how much I cared, they would finally accept me. Maybe they would finally be proud of me. Maybe my father would finally say, "You've done good, Becca." Maybe my mother would finally hug me without hesitation. Maybe Delilah would finally see me as a sister, not as a competitor. The night before I planned to surprise them, I could barely sleep. I imagined their reactions, the shock, the gratitude, the joy. I imagined my mother crying tears of happiness. I imagined my father shaking his head, speechless, before pulling me into an awkward but heartfelt hug. I imagined Delilah realizing, for the first time, that I had never been against her, that I had always wanted to help. I imagined us sitting together as a real family, for the first time in years, without resentment, without tension, without the invisible wall that had always separated us. I thought about the moment when I would hand them the red envelope, the one containing everything, the voucher for the resort, the legal paperwork for the house, and the details of Delilah's trust fund. I thought about the relief in their eyes. I thought about the way my heart would finally feel at peace. I thought about how, after all these years, I would finally belong. I was so sure. I was so fucking sure. I had no idea what was coming. I should have known. I should have fucking known. But some part of me, some stupid, naive part of me, still wanted to believe. I told myself over and over again that this time would be different. That this time, they'd see me. That this time, they'd accept what I was offering without resentment, without bitterness, without treating me like I was some kind of outsider. I was so goddamn wrong. The day I went to my parents' house, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Austin, the kind of day where the air smelled like fallen leaves and distant bonfires. The sun was setting, casting long golden streaks across the quiet suburban streets. I parked outside the house I had grown up in, gripping the small red envelope in my hands. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath, straightened my coat, and walked up to the door. When my mother opened it, she blinked in surprise, as if she hadn't expected to see me standing there. Her voice carried that familiar sharpness, the one that always made me feel like I had done something wrong simply by existing. She mentioned that I hadn't called ahead, as if my presence was an inconvenience. I hesitated. Not exactly the warmest welcome, but whatever. I asked if Dad was home. She nodded reluctantly and stepped aside, letting me in. The house was exactly the same. Same old furniture, same musty carpet, same faint scent of my mother's lavender-scented candles mixed with the oil from my father's leather recliner. It was like stepping into a time capsule, one where I had never truly belonged. My father was in his usual spot, half watching the news while flipping through an old newspaper. Delilah was on the couch, lazily scrolling through her phone, dressed in sweatpants and one of my mother's old sweaters. The second she saw me, she smirked. The same smirk she'd had since we were kids, like she knew something I didn't, like she had already won whatever imaginary game she thought we were playing. She made some snide remark about me showing up, about how I had finally made time in my oh-so-busy schedule to visit my humble roots. I ignored her and turned to my parents, my heart pounding. I had something for them. I held up the envelope, explaining that it was for their anniversary, that I had booked them a week-long stay at Palm Beach, Florida, one of the best resorts in the country. All expenses covered. A real getaway. Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from shock or gratitude. Not the kind of silence that comes from someone being overwhelmed with emotion. No, this was something else. My father's jaw tightened. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Delilah let out a short, sharp laugh. Something was wrong. I asked them what was going on. My mother sighed, setting her wine glass down on the table, shaking her head like I was some clueless child. She told me I shouldn't have gone through all that trouble, that it wasn't necessary. Trouble? I forced a laugh, trying to keep the atmosphere light, explaining that it wasn't trouble at all. It was a gift. Something special, just for them. She glanced at my father, then back at me. And then, she laughed. Not a laugh of surprise or delight. Not the kind of laugh a mother gives her child when she's proud. No, this was mocking. The kind of laugh that made my stomach drop. She told me, like it was the most casual thing in the world, that they had already sold the voucher. At first, I thought I had misheard her. Delilah, still smirking, reached for a potato chip and popped it into her mouth, explaining that she had been the one to list it online. Mom and Dad didn't really get how that stuff worked, so she had handled it for them. I couldn't speak. I just couldn't. My father finally chimed in, saying they didn't need the vacation, so why not turn it into something useful? Useful. My fingers tightened around the red envelope. I tried to explain, to remind them that it wasn't just a vacation. It was meant to be for them, a way to show them that I cared. But my father shrugged, dismissing my words as if they meant nothing. He said they didn't need charity. Charity. The word felt like a slap. My mother took another sip of her wine, looking completely unbothered, almost amused at my reaction. She went on to say that the idea of them prancing off to some luxury resort on my dime was ridiculous, as if the very thought of it was beneath them. I felt my voice rise as I tried to push through the lump in my throat, trying to make them understand that this wasn't about money. This was about me trying to do something good for them, trying to be a daughter they could be proud of. But then I caught the looks on their faces and I realized they didn't care. Delilah rolled her eyes, muttering something about how I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal, that they had gotten good money for it anyway. I turned to her, my vision blurring at the edges, asking if she had known about this the whole time. She just smirked, proud of herself, as if she had outsmarted me somehow. I felt sick. This wasn't just them rejecting my gift. This was them laughing at it. Laughing at me. They hadn't even considered telling me. They had just taken what I gave them and sold it off like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. And the worst part? They didn't even feel guilty about it. My father stood up, patting me on the shoulder, saying I shouldn't get so worked up over this, that it was just a vacation. Just a vacation. I swallowed, my throat tight. I had spent months planning this. I had put everything into this. And to them, it was just money. Just a meaningless transaction. I had been so stupid. I had walked into this house expecting love. And instead, I found nothing but mockery. I stared at them, at the people who were supposed to be my family. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval. But in that moment, I realized something that I should have known a long, long time ago. I was never going to be enough for them. And honestly, I was done trying. I doubted they expected that. Maybe they thought I would argue, demand an explanation, or beg them to reconsider. But I had nothing left to say. I had exhausted every ounce of effort trying to earn their approval, and now, standing in the doorway of the home I had spent years longing to be a part of, I felt nothing but emptiness. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The notifications kept lighting up my screen. First, smug and mocking messages from Delilah, as if she had just won some petty game. Then, a dismissive attempt from my mother, acting like I was overreacting. And finally, my father's condescending words, telling me to stop being dramatic. I ignored them all. Days passed, and the silence stretched between us. It was a relief, in a way. But nearly 2 weeks later, the quiet shattered when my phone rang unexpectedly. Aunt Margaret's name flashed across the screen. Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, had always been different from the rest of them. We were never particularly close, but she had never belittled me or dismissed my achievements the way my parents had. If she was calling now, it wasn't without reason. The moment I answered, her voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. She wasted no time with pleasantries or small talk. She told me my parents were in deep trouble. At first, I thought she was being dramatic. Maybe they had squandered the money they made from selling my gift and were now regretting it. The thought almost made me laugh. But then, as she continued speaking, my stomach dropped. The man they had sold the vacation package to? He wasn't just a regular buyer. He was a fraudster. They had unknowingly handed over their personal information, believing they were making a simple transaction. Instead, he had wiped out their accounts, maxed out credit cards, and taken out loans in their names. Now, their credit was destroyed, and they were drowning in debt. Margaret's voice was tight when she mentioned my mother's panicked call. She described how Catherine had broken down, sobbing about how everything was falling apart. My father, once so full of pride and certainty, had been reduced to a desperate man scrambling for solutions. And the cruelest part? They had gone through all of this because they refused to accept something from me. They had mocked my gift, spat on my kindness, and insisted they didn't need me. And now, when they found themselves helpless, the first person they reached out to for help was someone else. Margaret hesitated before revealing the last piece of information. My parents had been trying to contact me. She said they were desperate now, realizing the depth of their mistake. They had called the police, but the scammer had covered his tracks well. Legal action was their only real option, but without money for a lawyer, they had nowhere to turn. And that was why, after all this time, they were reaching out. She didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. They expected me to save them. I exhaled slowly, gripping my phone. For years, I had been nothing more than a scapegoat in their eyes. The daughter who worked too much, tried too hard, and would never truly be part of their world. But now, I was suddenly valuable to them, now that they needed something. As soon as I hung up, my phone came alive with notifications. First, there were the urgent, frantic messages, pleas from my mother, followed by my father's curt demands to call back immediately. They didn't bother with apologies or explanations, just insisted that we needed to talk. Then came the guilt trips. My mother insisted that family should always come first, that I couldn't just ignore them forever. My father, ever the authority figure, claimed I was being cruel for turning my back on them when they needed me most. Even Delilah messaged me. She, who had never once reached out unless it directly benefited her, was suddenly acting like she cared. She admitted that things had gotten bad, that our mother was falling apart under the stress. There was no apology in her words, no acknowledgement of how she had treated me, only an expectation that I would fix everything, just like I always had. I let the phone sit in silence. They had made their position clear. They didn't need me. They had laughed in my face, dismissed my effort, and told me to stay out of their lives. But now, when they were drowning, now they wanted me back. For the first time in my life, the power was in my hands. They needed me more than I needed them. And the worst part? I still cared, despite everything. The insults, the rejection, the way they had belittled me for years. Some part of me still wanted to help. I could. I had the resources, the money, the connections. I could hire the best lawyers, track down the scammer, and clean up their financial mess in ways they never could. But did they deserve that? That was the question that lingered in my mind. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure. I stared at my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. The unread messages from my family sat there like landmines, each one packed with guilt, manipulation, and entitlement. I should have just blocked them all and moved on. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened Reddit. My hands trembled slightly as I typed out the post. My parents mocked me for trying to give them something nice. They sold my gift for cash and laughed in my face. Now, because of their greed, they've been scammed and are drowning in debt. And suddenly, they need me. Do I help them? I read the words over and over again before hitting post. I already knew what I felt. I already knew the answer that had been forming in the back of my mind for days. But I needed to see it spelled out by strangers, to hear someone else say the words I couldn't bring myself to admit. The comments flooded in within minutes. Some were blunt. They made their bed. Let them lie in it. Others were more conflicted. You're a better person than they are. But that doesn't mean you owe them anything. And then there were the ones that struck a nerve. Even if you save them now, they will never appreciate you. They will never see you as their equal. If you do this, do it knowing it won't change anything. I exhaled slowly, setting my phone down. They were right. I was still their daughter. That fact wouldn't change. I had spent my entire life trying to be enough for them, trying to prove that my success didn't mean I loved them any less. I had worked so hard not just for myself, but for them, believing that if I took away their struggles, they would finally accept me. But that had never happened. And now? Now that they were suffering because of their own choices, they expected me to come running, as if nothing had happened. A sharp pang twisted in my chest. Was this what family was supposed to be? A one-way street where I was only valued when I was useful? I knew the answer. I had always known. And yet, some part of me, some small, wounded piece, still wanted to be the child they would finally love unconditionally. Just when I thought I had finally silenced the guilt gnawing at me, Delilah decided to remind me exactly why I was here in the first place. Her message was short, cold, almost mocking. None of this would have happened if you hadn't given them that stupid gift in the first place. This is your fault. I read the words twice, then a third time, and then I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Of course she would blame me. In her mind, I had done this to them. Not the scammer, not their own greed. Me. I could practically hear her voice, dripping with that same entitled venom I had grown up with. If I had just stayed in my lane, if I had just accepted my place as the daughter who wasn't supposed to give, if I had just let them struggle like they wanted, none of this would have happened. I could almost see her smug satisfaction, fully expecting me to buckle under the weight of guilt and come running to fix things. But she had miscalculated, because something inside me snapped. I wasn't the same person I had been all those years ago, and this time, I wasn't going to play the role they had assigned me. I let my phone fall onto the table beside me. I didn't need Reddit to tell me what to do. I already knew. For the first time in my life, I was going to put myself first. And they were going to learn what it meant to live without me. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. That watching them scramble, seeing their panic as the weight of their actions crashed down on them, brought me some kind of twisted justice. But the truth? All I felt was empty. There was no victory in this. No grand moment of proving them wrong. No satisfaction in seeing my father's pride crumble, my mother's arrogance shatter, or Delilah's entitlement dissolve into desperation. Because the people begging for my help weren't strangers. They were my family. The same family I had spent my entire life trying to please. And deep down, I had already mourned this relationship long before they ever came to me for help. I spent days agonizing over my decision. Not because I didn't know what to do. Deep down, I already did. But because I needed to accept it. For years, I had told myself that one day, my parents would see me as more than just a financial asset. That Delilah would grow up and take responsibility for herself. That my success wouldn't be something they resented, but something they could finally be proud of. But that was never going to happen. The only time they saw my value was when they needed something from me. So, I decided this would be the last time. Not out of love, not out of obligation, but for me. I wasn't going to let them ruin my peace of mind. I hired a lawyer to oversee their fraud case. I ensured the legal process moved in their favor so they wouldn't lose everything. And when it came to their financial disaster, I didn't write them a check. I paid for one financial advisor. One session, that was it. No get-out-of-jail-free card. No endless support. No more fixing their messes. If they wanted to rebuild their lives, they would have to do it on their own. And when the inevitable calls started flooding in, I ignored every single one. The final conversation I had with my parents was brief. I told them I had made sure they wouldn't drown completely, but that I was done being their safety net. My father reacted first, his voice laced with disbelief. He had always believed that no matter what, I would never walk away. That I would always be there, cleaning up his messes. My mother played the victim, pretending she had never meant to hurt me. And Delilah? She just stood there, her expression shifting from shock to something else. Realization. She finally understood that I wasn't playing their game anymore. That I had won. I left them with one final statement. You told me once that you didn't want anything from me. So now? Now you get exactly what you wanted. And I walked away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt free. The strangest thing happened after I cut them off. For the first time, I felt light. Like I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their resentment, their disappointment. I had spent so much of my life pouring energy into a family that only saw me as a bank account. And now, I could finally take that energy and give it to people who deserved it. So I built something better. I took everything I had once wanted to give my family, love, support, guidance, and I gave it to people who actually needed it. I started a foundation, a resource hub for people who, like me, had been betrayed by their families. It wasn't just about financial assistance. It was about creating a community, a place for people to rebuild, to find legal and emotional support, to know they weren't alone. I wasn't just fixing my own wounds. I was making sure others didn't have to suffer through the same pain alone, because they may have been my blood, but they were never my real family. It's been over a year since I walked away. Do I ever wonder if they regret it? Maybe. But the real question is, do I? And the answer? Not for a second. A year had passed. A whole year since I had last seen them, spoken to them, let them take up space in my mind. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The truth? They never really left. Despite everything, some small, stubborn part of me still wondered. Were they the same? Did they regret anything? Did they even think about me? I had moved forward, built something greater, something meaningful. The foundation I started had grown beyond anything I expected. Every day, I was surrounded by people who understood the pain of being discarded by their own families. People who weren't bound by blood, but by shared experience. And yet, every now and then, I found myself staring at my phone, at the blocked numbers, at the unopened emails sitting in a folder I refused to touch. And then, out of nowhere, it wasn't just emails anymore. At first, it was through extended family, relatives I barely spoke to. Someone mentioned that my father had refused to talk about me, like I had never existed. No surprises there. He had always been too proud, too stubborn to admit fault. But my mother? She had changed. The stories trickled in, one by one. How she no longer had that sharp, condescending tone when people brought up my name. How she had stopped defending what they had done. How she had been the one to finally tell Delilah the truth about the vacation, about my plans for them, about everything. And Delilah? She had started texting me. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just small things. A forwarded meme, a question about something random, a simple, "Hey, hope you're doing okay." I never responded, but I read every single one. Then came the letters, the emails, my mother reaching out, over and over again. At first, I deleted them without opening them. Then I started skimming. They weren't demands like before. They weren't guilt trips either. They were apologies. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust myself to want it too much. I never expected her to show up. Not outside my office, in the cold winter air, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. For a split second, I thought I was imagining it. But there she was, Catherine Hawthorne, the woman who had once scoffed at my success. The woman who had thrown away every attempt I had made to bring us closer. And yet, she didn't look like that woman anymore. She looked tired, not just physically, but in a way that settled into her bones. She was still my mother, but she was no longer the person who had laughed in my face as she sold my gift like it meant nothing. I could have ignored her, walked right past, let security handle it, but I didn't. I couldn't. So instead, I met her eyes for the first time in a year, and against every instinct I had, I let her speak. We sat in a quiet cafe, a place I had been to 100 times before. Except this time, I wasn't here for a business meeting. I was here for her. She didn't touch her coffee. For the first time in my life, my mother looked at me like a mother, not with judgment, not with condescension. Just a woman who had lost something and didn't know how to fix it. And then, she said the words I never thought I would hear. She told me she had been wrong, that she had been so blinded by resentment, by jealousy, that she had pushed me away rather than admit her own insecurities, that my success had made her feel like a failure, that every time she had belittled me, every time she had made me feel small, it was because she had felt small herself. And then, she said something that shook me to my core. She wasn't jealous of me. She was jealous of who she could have been, but never was. That she had spent years watching me become the person she had once dreamed of being, strong, independent, fearless, and instead of being proud, she had hated me for it. Because if I could do it, then why hadn't she? And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I saw her not as the woman who had hurt me, but as a person who had hurt herself just as much. I didn't know what to say. For years, I had imagined what this conversation might be like. Would I yell? Would I walk away? Would I finally get the apology I wanted? And yet, when it finally happened, all I could do was sit there and listen. I told her I wasn't coming back, that things would never be the same, that I wasn't going to open my heart, and pretend like none of it happened. But I also told her that if she truly wanted to change, if she really wanted to be better, to be someone I could one day trust again, then she would have to prove it. Not with words, not with apologies, but with actions. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just nodded, like she already knew that was the only way forward. As I got up to leave, I looked at her one last time. For the first time in years, I saw something in her that I had never seen before. Not disappointment, not resentment, but hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future where we could rebuild something new. And for the first time, I let myself believe it was possible. Top of form, bottom of form. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if my relationship with my mother will ever be truly repaired. I don't know if this newfound awareness she has will last, or if she will slip back into the woman she used to be. But I do know one thing. I gave her a chance. Not a guarantee, not a promise of reconciliation, but a chance. A door left slightly open, just enough for her to prove that she means what she says. And the rest? That's no longer my responsibility. I spent so many years twisting myself into knots, trying to earn love from people who refused to give it freely. I tried to be successful for them, to make them proud, to make them see me as worthy. But the truth is, you can't force someone to value you if they refuse to see your worth in the first place. That's the hardest lesson I've learned from all of this. Sometimes, family isn't about blood. Sometimes, family is the people who choose you, who appreciate you for who you are, without conditions, without resentment, without bitterness. And if there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. You don't have to keep fighting for people who refuse to respect you. But if someone truly wants to change, they'll show you. Not with words, not with promises, but with actions. This story was originally shared on r/TrueOffMyChest, one of Reddit's most well-known communities where people lay bare their raw, unfiltered experiences. It's a reminder that sometimes, the people who should love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest, but healing, in whatever form it takes, is still possible. What would you do if your mother truly wanted to make amends after betraying you? Would you forgive her? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more emotional real-life stories like this, don't forget to follow Reddit True Vault. Top of form, bottom of form.